native plant. It's super rugged, yet it's very lush and green looking. So that's an ideal plant for this garden.
Did you bare root all these?
Everything's bare rooted, which was essential going into the soil mix, which is an artificial mix based on sand and some other fun stuff.
Is that a pile of it back over there? Can
Yeah.
we go over there and look?
Sand, expanded shale, and scoria.
Yeah.
And a little bit of compost. A little bit.
What kind of compost? Manure compost or vegetative?
Vegetative. Yeah. I believe it's a city's compost. So this is an artificial mix, as it were. Mostly sand. It looks like round sand, so it's probably a creek sand from a gravel pit. But the expanded shale, which is really blending in and hard to see, is going to hold the nutrients and water in the long term. And the scoria will do both of those, but hold some air as well. So I'm kind of buffering both sides of the soil spectrum, not too wet, not too dry. But the sand matrix makes sure that it's always nicely drained and there's always oxygen in the soil, and also only can settle so much, and it won't keep compacting down like clays and silts will. It's sitting on top of a silty loam here. So a lot of the plants are going to go through this, have a lot of roots in it, and then have access to the nutrients and water right at that silt barrier down at the bottom. So I'm excited to be playing with this. This is the newest iteration of constant soil experiments, but yeah, the garden's 3/4 done. What hasn't been done, thanks to snow last fall, is this back mound here and the end of the garden returning to the building. This was actually an accident, this idea of kind of extending it a bit. It's where we dumped rocks to stage it, but when I was looking at the garden from all angles at the end of the day, I realized the garden does need to extend back here because I'm trying to blur the edge between a future perennial bed and rock garden. I'm trying to integrate and blur the boundaries of what is a crevice garden, because I don't think it needs to be so distinct. Here's crevice, here's perennial bed or rock garden. I'm trying to completely blur it from the extreme ends of both spectrums, of pure soil, traditional perennial, to really tight crevices with artificial soil. So, I mean, essentially that's a soil microclimate, the whole range is what we're aiming for, everything, so they can plant anything they want. But we dumped the rocks here, and I saw that, and I was like, oh man, that makes sense, because there's a bit of open perennial bed between it and the rest of the crevice garden, so it really does look like it's fading away underground, where a rock outcropping might be. But physical limitations of the gardens are everything from irrigation, where these heads are, so I can't block the spray. But one of the things is snow comes off this roof like an avalanche, and about 5 feet from it, it just pummels it. And so I can only really plant herbaceous stuff back there.
Right.
And there's also a grade to drain the building, because we did just put a giant mountain in front of the building, and we can't make that a dam. So there's drainage going around either side of this thing, because you can imagine in schizophrenic spring rains or spring melting, suddenly all the snow melts and you're just going to have a waterfall. So we have to work with future anticipated weather events. But trying to squeeze between that avalanche zone on the back and the exposed front here, which gets pummeled by wind, which always comes from the west 12 months of the year here. In between there is where I'm sticking in some funny things. We tried a bunch of manzanitas, checked on this guy yet.
Yeah.
And they all seem to have come through the winter pretty well. We gave them shade cloth for their first winter, but I expect once the manzanitas are rooted, they will fill a zone up to the point of where the wind contains them. And I think, and we'll see what actually happens in reality, but I think that'll be a wonderful aesthetic to really embrace here, is the edge of what wind will let grow. Like, there's a lot of Mywenia in here, the Patagonian cactus with leaves. Where it was exposed, some of those got burned but didn't die. Where they're not exposed, they look fine. So I think they're going to be really fun, where they'll creep around the rocks and peek out just to the edge of where they can grow. And I went ahead and planted things that I thought are not going to survive, just to find out where the actual boundary is for this microclimate. For instance, there are at least 3 agaves in here. One of them's the kaibab agave, which in my opinion is the hardiest of them.
Which one?
Kaibab, so the Grand Canyon agave. It doesn't come back from the roots like Perii, so it has to be a little tougher.
Huh.
So it's not as resilient, but it's got a little more latent toughness. We'll see. I have this overhang there, hoping it'll keep the center dry. We'll see what happens. It's very much an experiment. So a funny thing, as a joke to Jacob, who's the exterior horticulturist and a real foodie, I planted saffron crocus without telling him.
Oh, too funny.
And
the rabbits ate it.
He came out here to winter water, and he's like, "There's trash in the garden," because there's these bright blue spots. There's trash in the garden. And he found the saffron bloomed last fall.
Oh, too funny.
Turns out rabbits like saffron too, so they've mowed it down. Or they didn't mow it down. The saffron leaves actually kept through the winter, which is remarkable to me that they could take the shine in winter. So that's a bit of fun. And we'll see how they perennialize, or if they do. That'll be interesting. Let's see. What else do you want to see or know? What do you?
That's good, man.